Hello, hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
And, that's the beginning of our show.
We are bringing the heat right off. See, so hot that the horns outside Andy's house are hammering away.
Oh my god. That... Sometimes you just get off to a fast start, and that can be an issue for some people to go to... we wanted to talk today about just that, actually. Getting off to a quick start and how that can be detrimental. Even though it can seem beneficial. And the optics, I guess, of it all. The optics of getting off to a good start is not necessarily a good start. Right?
We hear so many times how the whole point of ramp is so that you can get off to a quick start. So you can get your mana up quickly, so you can immediately start playing the spells that really matter in the game. And that makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
The difficulty is you have to be paying attention to what everybody is doing. So you are not creating a situation where suddenly you are the clear and obvious leader.
Right. Like you always hear, like, oh, the most dangerous player is the one who had the turn 1 Soul Ring, right? Add turn 1 Soul Ring into Signet or whatever, and, you're off to a turn 2 with 5 mana. That is clearly threatening. And with that comes the responsibility of needing to protect yourself, because everyone is after you, generally.
In a lot of Magic games, now I'm not going to say all of them, because there are times when an explosive start, and I'm not just talking about ramp here, I'm talking about everything, where your opening hand basically lays out the first 3 turns for you, and they're going to be amazing. And you hit that third turn, you're dropping your 6 mana commander on turn 3, and your deck is clearly going full throttle at this point. And this is kind of what so many people are aiming for. They want that the amazing start. You want to get out of the gates fast and go, go, go. And I get that. We have been pummeled with the idea that is the best play for so long now. And
yeah.
And there are times when it is, in fact, the best play. It's especially the best play when you've got another opponent out who's doing the exact same thing. So if you're with a group and that is the standard, that's the expectation, well, that's fine. But if you're with a group where, that 6 mana commander on turn 3, and then you go around the board and everybody is then playing either their third land and a Signet, or maybe they're lucky enough that on turn 3 they're then playing a Cultivate. They are not anywhere near your power level.
Right. And I think too, with that kind of comes this idea that, like, in a vacuum, it's the best play. Not considering literally the rest of the board. You're taking into consideration 25% of the game. Yeah, it's the best play to do that. Like, absolutely do it.
Right. We're not playing in a vacuum. We're playing in a game of Magic. They are very different things.
And I think getting a turn 3 6 cost commander out is very much staking your claim as I am ready to go. And sometimes it's hard to back that up, because, if you get your 6 mana commander out, you're crossing your fingers for the rest of the round that you get to untap so that you can protect it. Granted, you might have gotten turn 2 Greaves out or whatever.
It's essentially, this is less about the turn 3 commander and more about the idea that you've had a blazing start. You are now in front.
Yeah.
The difficulty with being in front that early in the game is every single thing that happens now for at least the next 3-4 turns is going to be done under this whole vision of how do we deal with that person?
Right.
Every single card I draw, it stops being about making my deck run at optimal speed and starts being, do I have an answer for what they're doing? And
right.
now
you're painting a target on yourself, but more than that, you're halting everyone else's game so that they can focus on you.
Well, more than that, you now have to deal with the full power of those 3 other players. Now, maybe all 3 of them are just, we're at the point where they just have 3 lands, or maybe a 4th land, or 3 lands and a signet, or, they've got a couple of lands and a creature. They're not in a real position to be of a threat to you. Well, that's the reason you're there. But it doesn't mean that from then on in, that they can't do anything. And the longer it takes for you to take that position and take them out completely, they are outdrawing you. They are going to produce more mana than you. Every single action that they do is going to be just against you. In a normal game, when everybody is relatively equal, if I'm looking at the board and saying, okay, I want to attack somebody, who do I attack? Well, if everybody's relatively equal, I look around the board and I say, okay, well, I try and find a reason to attack one person, and then look at their board state and decide if I can. Well, because everything's relatively equal, I probably can't swing. In the other state, where somebody has jumped out to this massive lead, if I'm sitting there with 2 creatures, I look at their board state and say, what are they going to do back to me? And I don't care what the other 2 could do to me, because they're not going to do anything to me. They're looking to help me. It's the 3 of us are now facing that one person. So I don't have to worry about 3 attack steps. I just have to worry about 1. So it means, okay, so I have 2 creatures. I need to keep one of them back to protect myself against getting hammered by you. Fine. But that one creature is going to go after you. Whereas if you hadn't gotten off to such an amazing start, maybe it wouldn't go after anybody. Maybe it would just sit. So you wouldn't have to face that attack. You wouldn't have to expend cards and mana to try and stop that attack or stop the, whatever it is that I'm doing, whether it's attack or destroying one of your artifacts or destroying your creature as opposed to somebody else's. Everything gets focused on you when you're leading by a big margin like that.
I think that perfectly, encapsulates this idea that, like, let me posit this question for you, Bruce.
Yeah.
There's 4 people playing a game. What place do you want to see yourself as through the beginning to mid-game?
It's interesting because I have always looked at this and said, and this comes from a position where I always had fewer cards than my opponents when I played early on, and my decks were never as strong. So for me to get out to the lead, it meant I was using up a ton of the good cards that I had to get me there. So I never wanted to be out front, because it also meant that they were all then coming after me, and I certainly couldn't fight that off.
Right.
So my goal was to always be second. Try and sit below the leader, but not too far down.
Right.
Like, I mean, I don't, you don't want to actively be in last place. You don't want that.
No.
So I always thought, second place, this is where I want to be. Now, I've since changed that attitude, and that's a lot because of what you have said.
So when I started playing Magic, Bruce, you brought this idea to me where like you don't necessarily want to be out front. I mean, like we've talked about it for the past 10 minutes. And I have thought on it more, and like the idea of being in second, you're the first person that the strongest player is looking at, because once you're gone, the other two will be a piece of cake, hopefully. And I've thought on that and kind of come to this idea that maybe third is kind of where you want to sit for a majority of the game, because nobody's really looking at you, and nobody's really like delegitimizing your threat. If you're, in fourth,
right, you're not,
and you're not like you're not too far behind, but you're not seen as a direct threat,
right,
to any one player. And kind of with that, you have this bargaining chip to go after the person in first, the person in second. You can make a deal with whoever's in first to help take out the person in second, or vice versa. And when you approach the mid to late game, it becomes clearer what you have in hand, what is at your disposal going into end game, because you'll continue to draw and feel more comfortable holding things back as a person in third. And I think it's so interesting because as much as I've thought about this, I didn't really consciously take it into consideration when building my decks, but it kind of just happened that way. You look at how my Teysa deck started, and it was a lot of like, I had 30 lands. I wanted to be towards the back of the room. I didn't want people looking at me until it was too late.
Right. There is nothing wrong with a Wall of Blossoms on turn 2.
Mm-hmm.
You get to draw another card. You've got an 0/4 creature. That sucker is deterrent. Nobody wants to waste an attack into an 0/4 where it's not going to do anything. And on top of that, it has Defender. So you're not threatening anybody else. All that happened here was you played a creature that can now stop you from taking small bits of damage, and you got to draw a card. You're not in the driver's seat. You're not the most powerful player on the board. But you did draw a card, and you are saving yourself probably 5 to 7 points of damage. Just incidental damage from random, creature, or from, some player who sees, oh, you don't have anything to block, so I'll just swing at you. So, these little things that can go there. That's what I mean. You don't want to be last. Yeah. But at the same time, you just don't want... You don't want to go crazy right at the start. Now,
yeah, I think with being last is this idea that like you don't have a choice of being last.
You're last because you are. Because the game.
You're last because you're not drawing lands. You're last because you're not drawing spells. Yeah. This, that, or the other thing. Being third is like solidly like contemplating what's in your hand, thinking about how playing X would seem to the rest of the board, and all of this to say, it's not like we're saying, oh, be third going into mid game so that you can win better. It's just so that you can play more, right?
Well, early on in the game, these in the early part of the game, it is far easier to determine who the leader is. Yeah. Especially when somebody has one of these great starts. It's obvious who the leader is. As the game progresses into the mid game, into the late game, it gets harder and harder to determine who the leader is, because quite often, or you're not looking at the leader, you're looking at who's the biggest threat to you. And the biggest threat to you may not be the biggest threat to somebody else. If I have a way to fog your attack every single turn, then the guy who's a threat to me is the combo player or the guy who's got creatures that can do damage without, while not in combat. That's the threat. Now, for the person who's got a wall of creatures, the guy who can do some points of damage with his creatures while not in combat, he's not the threat. The threat is the guy who's doing the fog every turn, because you can't get around him. So as the game progresses, your threat assessment becomes dependent on your board state, dependent on everything else. It gets harder and harder to determine who is the leader. Now, there are some games where that does happen, and it's still obvious. So you can keep that in mind. But the focus here is really on the early turns and whether it's worth it to be jumping out and being out front. And I'm saying that the material cost to you is much higher when you do it early in the game, because now everybody's focus comes after you, and you now have to use up even more of your mana, of your cards, of your options.
Right.
Just
like we're playing
just to hold.
Yeah, we're
position.
playing 100 card singleton format. Like this idea that you will always have an answer is a fallacy. And so if you are off to an explosive start and you have the answers to the questions that people are giving you, then great. But that is highly unlikely.
Right.
Generally.
Now,
whether it's counters or removal for their own, like whatever, I don't know.
Now, to be fair, I just want to make this clear. We are a casual podcast. I am not saying that if you have, the most amazing hand going and you are like, okay, this has got to happen, then yeah, go for it. If that's why you're playing the game, if you're just like, okay, here we are, take me down, then you know what? Go to town. Go for it. If that's how you want to play it, then you're welcome to. I'm just saying that if you want to win a few extra games, keep in mind how you're starting, because you're burning resources by being out front, just because you're out front. If you were not the dominant player at the start of the game, the resources that you're now throwing away would not be something you'd have to throw away. So,
yeah, it's funny because, like, I think the turn 3 6 mana commander is poignant because even up to last week, for example, I played a game with my new Mimeoplasm deck. I think Mimeoplasm out on turn 3. It's a 5 mana commander.
Yeah.
I had like turn 2 Soul Ring into a Signet. I was like, yeah. And then turn 3 came, and I had finally got to like dump some things in the graveyard through whatever. I don't remember how I discarded them. And Mimeoplasm came in as a copy of Thassa, the new one, with 12 counters on it from Erixmithes. So she was, I don't know, like a 17 or 18 something. Mm-hmm. And then she sat there because I didn't have Devotion to Blue. I didn't have anything to blink. Having these explosive plays doesn't guarantee any sort of production. But then I also sat there and drew land after land after land for the next 4 turns. Yeah. So I seemed like a threat for that first turn that I got that out, and then immediately it all fell apart. So, like, had my opponents not seen that I was starting to flood, then then I would have had a big problem on my hands because I couldn't block with Dasa, and I had nothing else on board.
Right. It was...
Yeah.
You made a comment earlier, the idea of, building your deck in such a way so that you're not, like, blasting out of the gates at the start.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I used to build my decks, because those were the cards that I had.
Right.
I had so many powerful cards, and then I had to fill the deck with cards that were less powerful. So quite often, the best play that I had with the cards that I had in hand was that middle of the road play where I'm not really a threat, but I'm getting just enough out there to discourage people from coming my way.
Yeah.
Now that I can build, now that that's not an issue for me, and I can build up, I regularly build decks that are a lot more powerful than that can have those amazing turns way more often.
Yeah.
But then when I get the chance to do it, a lot of times you just sort of look at the board and say, this is not the right board, not the right time to do this. I'm gonna get clobbered. If I'm the green player and I've got, Exploration, Cultivate, Kodama's Reach in my opening hand, along with 3 lands. Yes, I could try and play all that out as fast as possible and get as far out in front as I can. But sometimes that's not the right play. There are plenty of times when you just play the land. Sure, play your Cultivate, and then don't do anything. Hold on to the Kodama's Reach. There's no reason to play it. It's going to get you that extra land out, but all that's going to do is make you into the target, make you into this big leader. Wait until somebody else plays something big out. It's like, okay, now I can play out my Kodama's Reach, because nobody cares. Nobody's going to care that the green player has one more land out and another land in their hand. Who cares? It's irrelevant at this point. We've got bigger fish to fry over in this corner of the board. So and what did it cost me? It cost me nothing. All it cost me was I looked around the board and said, don't do both in one turn. Because then it like somehow it looks like you're going off. The same could be said about playing any 2 spells in a turn. Bam, bam. You hit one, you follow up with the other, and it's just this 1-2 punch, and suddenly it's like, wow, what is he doing over there? Things are going crazy. Like, they're not going crazy. Instead, you play the one spell, wait through the next person's turn, and then that instant that you played on your turn, then you play it on their turn. Now it doesn't look like you really did much of anything. So you're trying, so you're trying to hide it, trying to sort of blend. You want to blend in a little better than you would if you just blast it out at the start of the turn.
Yeah.
So.
It's interesting because I think like even though I mentioned, I inadvertently build decks this certain way to kind of always be a step behind everyone. I'm over the past year that we've been, in quarantine. I think that my deck building has improved more than the previous 3 years, which is great. But it also just means that my decks are a little bit more powerful than they used to be. And I have to deal with this idea that I'm going to be seen as a threat, and that's okay. But I think it has lent me to this discovery that I need to practice holding it back. Practice not doing the thing that seems so obvious to do, because it can be seen as threatening, and the eyes will follow. You will probably make it further in the game more often, thinking twice about it. And whether you do it or not still is, up to that judgment. But let's quickly take a break.
Yep.
We'll be right back with some more talking about early game shenanigans. But first, here's a word from our sponsor.
This Temple of False Pod is brought to you by Wall of Blossoms, because sometimes you just need to slow down and smell the flowers. Now back to you. So Andy, I think for this part of the show, I wanted to talk about just some cards that we like to see on some of the early turns. Mm-hmm. Now, this is not a best of list. This is not. You must play this card. These are cards that are solid in the early going, but they aren't going to then proceed to scare the crap out of your opponents and lead them to come charging after you. These are solid cards that are good plays in the early game, which will become either much better later on, or at least give you that protection now.
It's funny that you say that, because like that so succinctly describes the cards that I chose, because most of the cards I chose are white, so they're like not threatening, they're kind of lame, they're good-ish, they're white.
I'm essentially talking about cards like Wall of Blossoms. It's this unassuming card that does way more work than you think it's doing, and that's the sort of thing I love.
Yeah.
So,
and like, even for like, say, turn one plays, some of the greatest turn one plays that I've had that are so unassuming, but like still like a little annoying to some people. We've got things like Soul Attendant, Soul Warden. You get it out there, you start gaining life incrementally, of course, but it's pretty great. And then you can follow that up with a turn 2, a Johnny's Pride Mate,
right.
Start getting bigger creatures.
I mean, the idea, especially in the early turns, cards like that are going to gain you life as players put creatures on the battlefield.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not like you're playing it on turn 5 with the threat that if this card is still here on my next turn, I'm going to play an X spell and drop, drop a ton of token creatures.
Right.
So then gain, a ton of life. So it doesn't have that huge uber threat hanging over it. This, a card like that, it's going to gain you 6 or 7 life. And then generally that's sort of the end of it.
And you got a blocker up.
Exactly. So that when it comes time, yeah, okay, fine, I'll chump it. You know what? It already gained me 15 life or 10 life or whatever. It served its purpose in the early game, and now it's a chump blocker, and you're golden.
It's funny because also kind of along the same lines, turn 1 white play that gets you life when opponents play creatures is Authority of the Consuls. Granted, this is a bit more annoying. Authority of the Consuls is 1 white enchantment, which is kind of why I was looking at it, which I'll talk about in a second. But it says creatures your opponents play come in tapped. When an opponent enters the battlefield under your creature's control, you gain 1 life. That's it.
Right. Now,
you're playing against somebody who has a deck full of haste. They're going to be pretty pissed off because now essentially all those creatures don't have haste and nobody has any blockers up. This card obviously does better a little later in the game. But it kind of led me into the idea of early enchantments that just kind of sit there and either people get annoyed by or don't pay attention to. But I it led to this really interesting idea that getting your utility enchantments out, whether it's this Dawn of Hope, which when you gain life you pay to draw cards.
Well, in one of our previous Temple of Treasure episodes, or Temple's Treasures. One of our previous Temple's Treasures episodes, Seal of Fire.
Yeah.
1 mana enchantment, sack it to do 2 points. You get that on a turn 1 or turn 2. No one's swinging at you. You're just going to take out their creature because Seal of Fire can handle anything that's coming out in turn 1 or turn 2.
Yeah.
So it's completely unassuming. It just sits there, prevents a bunch of attacks from other people against you, and then at some point, people are going to forget about it because it's only 2 points of damage, and then you're going to get into a combat step where you either need to do 2 more points to get rid of some big nasty creature, or you need to do 2 more points because you're blocking some big nasty creature. So it does its job, and that's just huge. One of the other early play turns that I like, that honestly has been around forever, literally since the start of the game, Birds of Paradise. I like Birds of Paradise.
Yeah, it's a strictly better Land War Elf.
Well, 0/1 flyer, 0/1, so it can't attack, it can't do damage, which is kind of a downside because it means that anybody with a 1/1 may very well swing at you in the hopes that you actually block. I mean, everybody knows that Birds is not going to block a 1/1. However, later on, when it's a 5/5 coming your way, that Birds is going to step in front.
Oh, yes.
But in the meantime, you're tapping for mana, whether it's
of any color.
So, but even if it only needs to be green, there's nothing, Birds of Paradise offers that up. And I love that about this card. It is just, it's another unassuming play because it is a 0/1 bird. You're not going to fly over and do a point of damage to anybody. It's just sitting there to tap for mana. So, I love that.
Kind of go with the turn 1 plays. This is a card that I had out on a turn 1 play recently that I was surprised to see it get removed on turn 4. But it's Tortured Existence. Pauper All-Star. It's one black, a single black enchantment for 1 black, and choose and discard a creature card, which I guess it just is now discard a creature card. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah.
Which, yes, valuable. It's a good card, especially for 1 black. And, I mean, it's a very cheap activated ability. But getting this out on turn 1, I quite enjoy getting this out early because it kind of gives you options, especially if people start making you discard, if you fill your hand up and you have to discard anyway, or things start dying. The chances of your creatures dying in this enchantment not pretty high until somebody targets it and takes it out.
Right. One of the other early turn cards that I like, and in the end actually works out to be a fairly good card, even in the late game, is a little card from Mirage. It's a 1/1 creature, and it's called Dream Fighter. Now,
Dream Fighter.
For most of you, this is going to be a brand new card, something you've never heard of. And when you read it, it's probably not going to help much because you're still not going to know what the heck it's talking about. So Dream Fighter says it's for 2 and a blue. It's a human soldier. It says whenever Dream Fighter blocks or becomes blocked by a creature, Dream Fighter and that creature phase out. Now what phase out means is that when they phase out, they're treated as though they don't exist. And each of those cards phase in before its controller's untap steps. If I have...
So your creature phases in before theirs.
So if yeah, exactly. So if I have Dream Fighter and Andy's got a 5/5 creature. Now Andy swings in with the 5/5. I block with the Dream Fighter. Now, the Dream Fighter is now blocking. We don't wait for the combat damage. At that point, they phase out. So Andy's creature doesn't do any damage to me, doesn't do any damage to the Dream Fighter, and it's gone. So even if it was a 5/5 with Vigilance, a 5/5 with Trample and Vigilance, it doesn't matter. Because as soon as it's blocked, boom, it's gone and it's phased out. Now, because it's phased out, I get my Dream Fighter back before Andy gets his creature back because he attacked me with it. It's his turn. So he's not going to get it back until everybody else gets a turn. Which means not only me, but the other two players now get to take a shot at Andy because he doesn't have his 5/5 handy. So, and then on my turn, I get the Dream Fighter back before the untap. So it comes back, and even if it was tapped, it's untapped now, and it's ready to do it again to the next creature. Obviously, the Dream Fighter doesn't fly, so flyer, it can't help you with the flyers. But it blocks anything on the ground. Death Touch, not a problem. First Strike, not a problem, because they block, and then you go to First Strike. It's gone before we get to First Strike.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're going to see this coming, and they're just not going to attack you.
Exactly, they're not going to attack you. They're going to.
Yeah, that's big. That's big on its own.
So, all by itself, essentially, it's a creature that says your best creature is not going to be there for the rest of the round. Are you prepared to swing?
Question, just because I have had such small experience. Few experience, little experience. Little experience. Since I've had such little experience with phasing, does that, when they phase back in, does it trigger, like, is it a new creature?
No. So...
Okay, so you don't get ETB triggers and they're not summoning sick.
Phasing has gone through some weird changes, and at one point, when a creature phased out, the enter the battlefield triggers didn't work, but when it phased out, leaving the battlefield triggers did kick in. So it was very weird that way, but they have since changed it. You don't get enter the battlefield triggers or leave the battlefield triggers.
Interesting.
It's just gone. It doesn't enter or leave. It's just gone.
That's cool.
And don't ask me what happens. Like, I believe if there's an enchantment or an piece of equipment attached,
I think
to
everything's the same.
It goes with it, and then it comes back with it still attached. Or
I'm trying to think of, like, Teferi's protection type.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't remember exactly how that works out, just because I don't play a lot of phasing, so I just don't remember. But I do know that Dream Fighter does this, and it's just...
Don't take our rulings as gospel, kids.
Yeah, we're a casual podcast. This is how phasing works. If you're looking for a deeper understanding, go talk to a judge. But Dream Fighter is just wonderful this way, because you're not going to swing with this thing, and everybody knows it. What, you're going to attack? Then they block with anything, and they all phase out. They don't take any damage either, and their creature comes back before yours. So now this amazing blocker that you had is now gone. So you're never attacking with the Dream Fighter. The fact that it's a 1/1, it could be a 10/1, it could be a 0/1. It doesn't matter. It just needs to be alive to block. So yeah, I mean, this is it's one of those early cards that's fairly unassuming, because it's just not that big a threat to anybody else. It's a protection to you. But this protection only gets better as the game goes on, because the creatures get bigger, the creatures that it stuff get bigger and bigger. So
Yeah, I mean, even down to like playing your morphs early. It honestly just it builds your presence on the board, but also kind of builds your hand. Like they're essentially cards that are in your hands that are just on the board, because it's not information for your opponents, or it's and you can play them anytime. I mean, you can flip them over whenever. Granted, it could possibly be seen as threatening, but generally they're like pretty reactive. So they're not like super overpowered unless you're playing things like Animar.
Right.
I'm trying to find an early game. Brown Oof is pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of snakes that either have like reach or death touch or both, that are pretty good early game things to kind of help pad out not getting attacked early game. That's it.
Well,
yeah, I think if you take away anything from this episode, just know that being in first the whole game does not guarantee you a win. Being in first if you're trying to win the game, being in first only matters at the end of the game. Period.
Right.
And so, as many strategies as there are out there, one that Bruce and I subscribe to tends to be don't be a target until you need to be. I think is the simplest way to put it, honestly.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of managing your resources and being the target at any point in the game, but especially early on when it's very easy to figure out who the target is going to drain on your resources more than it would if you weren't the leader. And it's not going to cost you the game to not be the leader in the early game. I mean, if you've got your soul ring for turn 1, you go ahead and play it, but just remember you need to control how you use that for the next few turns. Manage the expectations of your opponents. Make sure they understand that, or try and you want to build the situation where they're not seeing you as the threat just because you've got twice as much mana as they do.
Yeah, understand the consequences before you take your actions.
Right.
But I think that's kind of about sucking the well dry here for this topic for tonight. So we're gonna wrap it up. Come back next week for another episode of Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. Thank you so much for coming by and hanging out. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Have a great day, night, whenever you listen to this, and may your fifth land be the temple.
Bye.
Hey everyone, Andy here. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Temple of the False Pod. Just a few housekeeping things here at the end of the show. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, pretty much wherever you can find podcasts. Subscribe and give us a review. It really helps out the show. And it'll show us what you like about our podcast. Also, we've got a Twitter and an Instagram. Our handle is FalsePodMTG, all one word. So be sure to follow us. Feel free to reach out to us there or drop us an email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com and tell us your favorite Magic-related story. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again to you, And to Bruce, he's Mana Burned on Twitter, and I'm Andy Weekend on Twitter and Twitch. We're Temple of a False Pod, where our decks aren't optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. Have a great night, and may your fifth land be the Temple.